Welcome back to a Celtic State of Mind. We're on time, Brian. It's 12:30. It's Wednesday. I'm sitting
Bang
in for
on.
Kev Graham, and I'm here today with Brian Degnan and the newest recruit to the Acsom team, James McKenzie. How's it been? You've been in the main squad for the last 3 weeks. How are you finding it, mate?
It's great to be back on a good platform to talk about Celtic with some like-minded folk. Can you ask for much better?
Exactly. Celtic State of Mind. And that's what it's all about. We're all sharing the same state of mind and not all always sharing the same opinions, Brian Degnan, but that, again, is what it's all about. We're going to be talking about, can you call it a rebuild, what Ange is doing this pre-season? It doesn't feel like a rebuild. Last pre-season was a rebuild because we were on the bones of our backsides and he rebuilt us. But there is definitely a lot of work to be done, Brian. I mean, I take a note of all the players that are linked to Celtic, but by the end of the pre-season period, you're going to be into the dozens, and you're trying to pinpoint where there's a bit of basis or where there are good sources involved. But it's pretty clear that he is looking for very specific areas to strengthen, Brian. Anybody who's been standing out in terms of those linked to us so far for you?
Yeah, again, it's always funny talking about these guys we're linked with because it could be the case that we never hear from them again in a month or so, and someone totally out the blue. I recall when Kyogo appeared, that came from absolute nowhere into
Yeah.
specifically. So don't get me wrong, I would love another couple of Kyogos if we could get them. So that'd be fine. But the person that I'm most excited about that we're linked with currently, and I'm not sure if this is how you see his name, but Vinicius Souza. Brazilian,
Yep.
22 years old, defensive mid, big unit, very, very strong defensively. And I think that's what we need. I've said before a few times, I think Callum McGregor's best position's a bit further forward, kind of where Hatate plays. Is that sort of box to box. I know he's 6 in the 6, but I do get concerned sometimes that he's no strong defensively as he is going forward. So having a real strong presence in there would be good. And I don't know that I don't often buy into the idea that we're physically weak because I think that games we lose, I don't think we often get bullied. I think that if you look at, and I'm not comparing them, but teams like the Spain team, they won the World Cup, Euros, they were all wee short guys. They played their football. They didn't need big guys. Now, obviously, we don't have that level of ability in the squad. So you could offset that with a bit more physicality, especially since you've lost Rogic, who's like 6'2", Beaton, who's like 6'4", and potentially Julien. So I do think we need a bit of physicality. And Vinicius, Big Vinny, looks as if he can provide it. I also think as well, at 22 years old, he absolutely fits perfectly with what I think our model is going to be moving forward. And if we can get him playing well in the Champions League, you're onto a winner there, even if it's not a future transfer.
Big Vinny, he's already given him a nickname, James. That's what we do as Celtic fans. But a couple of good points here by Brian. The first one that I'm going to raise, obviously, he's been in action on international duty, Callum McGregor. I think if we look at the last 2 seasons in isolation with Callum McGregor, we know the development of that player since he broke in under Ronnie Deila. But the last 2 seasons, the disappointment of that campaign under Lenny, where after a couple of games he's coming out and basically it was almost like a plea for help. It was almost as if he was doing that blinking thing when he's been interviewed to say all is not well, right? Exactly. We don't know what we're doing. There isn't a game plan. And then you compare that to last season and the way, and we've said this a few times, the way that often a game wasn't going Celtic's way, he grabs it by the scruff of the neck and we end up getting kicking and screaming, pulled back into a game by McGregor. I think we've seen a different side to him last season. But where is he going to go next season in terms of his development? What type of Callum McGregor do you expect to see, James? Is it going to be, like Brian suggests, someone who is going to be more offensive, or are you going to be looking for more of the same from Callum this season?
I feel like it's going to be more the same, but like Brian, I'd like to see him in a more attacking sense. I feel like he was at his best playing that attacking role under Rodgers. You're just going to look at the Cup finals, for example. He played the goal against Motherwell he scored. It was absolutely tremendous. I think he plays a lot, but he does well in the 6. He does a very competent role there, but he's much better suited going forward. I think, especially in Europe. McGregor, he can't do that number 6 role alone by himself, which is why I think we're looking at Vinicius, Sosa, a bit more cover stability, a bit of a powerhouse, and then defence stoppers getting overrun so quickly and so easily. Because if you look at our midfield three now, I'd say our strongest midfield three is McGregor, Hatate, and Matt O'Reilly, which is they're all players of a very similar mould. So it's really encouraging that we're looking at a different sort of style of midfield, especially with Near Beaton going out.
That's the thing that you tend to forget, because I don't think Beaton or Rogic were instantly recognisable as being these kind of like no athletic but combative style players. But when you do look at the makeup of them, the physicality of them, they definitely will be missed. And I think that one thing about Hatate that I'll be looking forward to next season is to see a wee bit more of his physicality, Brian, because I think that he seemed to be off it a wee bit, not quite to the same degree as the Smile of Sorrow, but he was off it a wee bit and he was giving away a lot of fouls. But what he did show that he had absolutely no qualms with getting involved with the physical side of the Scottish game. It might have just been that he was getting up to speed, up to tempo, but he may have that physicality. We've maybe just not seen it to the same kind of degree, Brian. Do you think that will be part of Rio's game next season?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really key part of his game. Even if I saw some footage of him when he was playing left back for his previous team as well, and he likes to tackle, he likes to throw himself around, and he's got that energy. Hatate is a player that I really like. I remember when he debuted, and I said at the time, and I thought it was one of the best debuts I'd seen, just in terms of it. His off the ball work was excellent. Mm-hmm. It did dip in and out a wee bit. He came out publicly and said he was fatigued. There was a lot of games, and he had already played a full season. And I think he's only been playing, professional for like 3 years or 2 years or something. Because I think in the Japanese, they tend to play at university and then come out and then start playing professionally.
Yeah.
He takes these things into account, so he's relatively new to the game in a lot of ways. And I think he saw some incredible potential. And again, I think if that midfield dynamic's right, where you've got someone really strong defensively, it allows those attacking players to sort of go where they will. And what I'm interested in seeing, I agree with James, I think McGregor, Hatate, O'Reilly seems the strongest three, but if you've got McGregor playing instead of Hatate and a stronger Sousa, then your sort of second three, if you will, would be Turnbull, Hatate and Ideguchi. And that is quite an exciting midfield for me as well, because by all accounts, Ideguchi, we've not seen much of him, and he's not the biggest guy. Apparently he loves a tackle as well. He's really, really fast, likes to get about the park. And I know if it comparisons with Kante before in terms of we Sorrow when he first appeared, but I think imagine that might a similar mould, and that uses his pace and his positional sense to win the tackle as opposed to sheer brute strength. So I think there's so much to come. I mean, we talk about just Hatate next season, but you think a Matt O'Reilly with full pre-season, Yakimakis with full pre-season. I mean, it's an incredibly exciting Abada. How good could he be next season? Jota, if we get the deal over the line, he settles and he's now fully integrated into that team, and it's a really, really exciting time. And I think the other thing that's going to help the midfield, since we're talking about that, is the fact that big Carter Vickers is here. So you've got that continuity at the back as well. So the players in front of him get the confidence that the big man's right behind you. That helps his fullbacks, that helps the midfielders, who then helps the attackers. So there's so much to be excited about. It's, there's not, other than the Carter Vickers signing, which is great, there's not much else happened yet, and I'm already absolutely buzzing for the season. It's the Ange effect, isn't it?
It is the Ange effect. We'll run through that. We'll talk about Carter Vickers. We'll also talk about some of the shuffling that's happening behind the scenes as well. Harry Kewell coming in. Kevin and I spoke about it on Monday. We'll have a wee chat about the jersey that James McKenzie is currently wearing and the one that Celtic have just launched as well. Anything else you want to talk about, let us know in the comments section. The point that Brian made about Rio Hatate, I remember it was made a couple of weeks back by Alan Morrison talking about, Brian, the fact that he hasn't actually played much senior football. And when you consider that he's 24 years of age and he comes to Celtic having played 75 games at 24 years of age, that I think that shows when you consider that McGregor can play up to 67 in a season. You know, that here's a guy that's come in, very little football really, if you think about a footballer's career maybe starting age 17 or 18 in the senior game. 6 years under his belt, 75 games. So you're absolutely right. He's still inexperienced in that respect. When you think about Hatate, James, and what Brian was saying there, the fact that we haven't seen him with a full pre-season or even a break. Maeda's another one. Kyogo, hopefully, you'll see an injury-free season by him. You've also got Giakoumakis, players like Carter Vickers who came in late in the transfer window, as did Starfelt. The integration of that, the galvanisation of all these guys who are already there, could, potentially already put us in a better position before we bring anybody else in. And then obviously you glean that and you continue to build that and give extra layers to that by bringing in new players. So is it an exciting prospect for you, even with what we have at the club currently, before we bring in any new bodies?
Yeah, it's very exciting for myself. You said, you asked the question, is it a rebuild? It's not a rebuild, it's building upon. We're building upon the success of last season, and we can only add more quality to the team. But this team can't get any worse. I don't think we're going to have any major sales this, so I don't see anyone really moving on. I think Carter Vickers, I want to see him with a full pre-season. But the thing is, we don't need to worry about the qualifiers, don't need to worry about rushing the signings either. We can give the players time to bed in. There's no rush or hassle or urgency in this transfer. And you still want to get the business done a bit early, but the fact that you've got the safety net, that you can take your time with it and work out the smart moves, it just makes things that much easier for Celtic this summer as well.
I think what you said there, the smart moves, Celtic, for me, and I mentioned this on social media last week, didn't get universal agreement, but hey, that's what it's all about. I think Celtic have been smarter in the transfer market, Brian, and I think we need to start talking about that as well, how we've utilised, particularly for me, the loan market. And when I suggested that last week, some of the feedback I was getting was, we've always done well in the loan market. I don't agree with that. I think that for the best part of 10 years, we have brought a lot of kind of players in who it was short-termism. Now, people say, but if they were a success, we would have signed them. That's not the case, because we didn't have that the buyout clause at the end of the loan deal on the majority of these players. And there's a whole list of them, from the likes of Wakaso and Tonev and Inga Berge, and there's loads of them. And I know that transfers and buying in players isn't an exact science in relation to every club gets it wrong from time to time. I think Ange's record so far has been spectacular. It's been sensational. That's been one of the main reasons for his success, has been the recruitment. But what's your thoughts, Brian, on the way that Celtic have changed their approach to recruitment? Because I think they have, and particularly with the loan market.
Yeah, I think Michael Nicholson deserves massive credit, actually. You know what? I think he's kind of went about his business quite quietly, and there's definitely been a sea change in how they go about their business. The fact that that it's big contracts as well, 4 years, 5 years. Make sure these guys come in and getting the more important thing was when you talk about the loan system changing. I think people misunderstand what you mean, because we've got Jota in, he's done a year and we've signed him, or we'll potentially sign him, right? But what's different is we already had the buyout thing put in. Mm-hmm. There was a strategy in place for that. A year later, there was this. Well, this is successful. We've got him for next season. These are things that have been put in place that never was before. Mm-hmm. And I get what people talk about. Like, I think Robbie Keane's an example. He came in and he done really well. He had a personally successful season at Celtic, or 6 months at Celtic. But after that, we've just kicked the can down the road. If you keep using loan signings, and I think Lennon's last season, we had like 5 loan signings, I think. So as soon as they go, you haven't placed 5 players, then all the players leave, and then that's when you've got the Ange size rebuild he had. Yeah. And that's where that short-termism comes in. It doesn't matter if they're successful within the period they're in loan. That's almost irrelevant, because if you need to replace them the next season, you can't keep having loan signings. It's never going to work. And essentially, like, it was a bit like, you remember when Edward, in the first few games of the season under Ange, you could tell he was waiting for a move.
Yeah.
So almost that wasn't wanting to put himself quite into the danger line, wasn't wanting to get injured, wasn't he? You could see that in loan players as well. You've got to imagine they're thinking, well, I just want a day here, show up, and then go back to my own club. You can't have that. So at least with guys like CCV and Jota, there's a potential the buyouts pretty much arranged with the clubs. Mm-hmm. It's just formalising it then. And that's a very clever way of doing business. And I think what people need to understand as well is, so say we spend 13 million on Jota and CCV, and we get, say, Souza and a left back in his loan to buys. So we'll not spend money for them this season, but that fee's already arranged, so that next season it comes off of that budget.
Yeah,
You're spending crazy money right away. It's quite I mean, Celtic's business model is quite risk averse anyway, but that fits into that quite well. Plus, you're getting success on the park, and that's the alignment that we've not had for a while. And I say Michael Nicholson and Ange, of course, deserves you credit for that.
No, you're right, because if you think about, let's talk about loans and how we've used them previously. So one of my biggest bugbears was the way that we didn't seem capable, James, of replacing Mikael Lustig, right? And there was a whole kind of succession of right backs coming through, and the vast majority of them were just loan deals. So we brought in Jeremy Frimpong. He fitted the mould of a young player who, if he does well, he could kick on and we could make some money from him. And that's exactly what we did. But then you start thinking about, obviously, John Joe Kenny, Maurice Bauer, Jeremy Toljan. Now, these guys, they came in and there was a real short-termism about them. I mean, I never expected to keep any of the three of them, to be honest. And I think if we were to bring in, like Brian says there, and it's not a right back, let's say it was a left back, and we were to bring them in on loan this summer, you'd be far more confident of that deal this time round, wouldn't you, than in previous seasons. You'd be thinking, all right, so we've done it with Maeda, we've done it with Carter Vickers, hopefully we've done it with Jota. This is a more long-term, even though we're trying before we buy. Do you think there's been a change in your mindset when it comes to how we do loan deals, James?
Yeah, it seems we've been a lot smarter. It seems like there's players that actually fit the mould and fit the system, where in previous years, it just felt like it was just plugging a gap.
Mm-hmm.
It's, we need a right back. He's available. We'll get Maurice Bauer. Our defence isn't looking very good. We'll get John Joe Kenny till the end of the season. Whereas Jota, he clearly fits Ange's system. Cameron Carter-Vickers, experienced at a high level, good at playing out for the back. These are players that actually fit the mould and fit the system. It actually looks like Ange just picked the players out himself. Whereas in previous years, it looked like the players been picked out for us. I think that's the best way I can put it.
I mean, you're right. Ronnie Deila, right? We don't know the ins and outs of every deal, but do you think he had much to do with Picasso and Tonev coming to Celtic? Probably not. And then you look at guys like Ollie Burke and around about that time, Timo Weah, Charlie Masonda. And again, I'm not sure if we were bringing them in with a view to making the deals permanent. And obviously all three of them did not become permanent fixtures at Celtic. Thanks everybody for getting involved in the chat. We do appreciate everybody's support, getting on the Acsom Bulletin on a daily basis. Obviously next season we will be looking to cover every game as well, in such a way that we could be at the game, but we won't be doing the vox popping outside the stadium. So hopefully we will be able to do the match day coverage from somewhere near to the stadium. And the Urban Culture comes in. I've been away for a week from here, got severe heebie-jeebies. Is that what it does to you? Is it like withdrawal symptoms? Wife wouldn't let me put it on as we had Glasgow visitors. Oh dear, so the wife isn't a fan. I'm sorry to hear that, Urban Culture, but welcome back anyway. And Keith Oakden is coming in from Plymouth. Where are you tuning in from? It's all over the world. It's a Celtic state of mind. Doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter where you're from. It's where you're at, as Angelo Dundee once said. And then Noel, who agrees with James, are strengthening, not a rebuild, adding depth. Now, when we're looking at the situation we were in last season, Brian, we've already mentioned Edouard, and it's been mentioned today. We're not in a position where we're expecting to lose anybody that we would rather keep, anybody who could be described as an asset to the team. So last season we all knew that Christie and Edouard and Ayer were on their way. Ange was able to use Edouard and Christie in the early games. I think Christie showed up really well. I've said that before. Edouard, as you say, checked out, didn't want to get injured, didn't want to scupper any move. This time round, it would be an absolute shock if any of our top players were to leave. It's just not going to happen this time round as well, Brian. So let's have a wee think about that. I think over the piece, there's always been a player in our team that you kind of expected in the not too distant future to be leaving. So be that Fraser Forster or Kieran Tierney or Dembele, Edouard. There was always Van Dijk, for example. You knew that the time is coming. I'm not getting that vibe at this moment in time. I can't see that, Brian, in the next couple of seasons as we sit here just now. Is that me being naive? Does it all depend on good showings in the Champions League this season? Could we be sitting here in a year's time thinking it's a matter of time before one of the top players goes? Or has Ange completely changed the culture of that at the club, do you think?
I think it's kind of a mixture of all of the points you made there. I think the Champions League is the key one, because everyone that's playing there just now wants to play in the Champions League. And as much as we love all the players, there's not many that are going to go straight for here into a club that's playing Champions League football other than Celtic. So why would they give that up? Also, you get the impression that, we're big on talking about the culture at Celtic and the culture that Ange has sort of fostered there with getting these players in. You can tell they're enjoying it. They like going to their work. They're playing good football with players that seem to get on with and a system they enjoy. They've got the crowd all backing them. They've had success, and now they're going to play in the Champions League. At this moment, why would you leave? Now, if in the Champions League and Kyogo scores a hat-trick against Real Madrid, home and away, you can imagine the bids coming in. But at this stage, I'm not surprised that there's a lack of movement. Just to pick up on something James said, I think there was a really good point there. We talked about when we were talking about the three right backs, and we had Ralston sitting there, or he wasn't getting played. They obviously at the start of the season when Ralston got a contract, we were all going, it's a bit controversial, Ange. That was a bit of a move, and then wow, it's got full Scotland international, excellent player, a fan's favourite. Now, I made a comment, I think it was last week, we were talking about the goalkeeping situation. And I think we're linked with Seagrass coming in. And I said, well, what kind of message does that say to like Toby Oluwayemi in reserves?
Yeah.
Could he, Ralston, are we doing someone out of position for the sake that we don't want to risk it? And it's just that it popped in my head there when you mentioned that, if we don't give players a chance and don't pick them out, what's the point of them being there? So I think that might be reflective in this transfer window. I think there may be times where you're thinking, well, we need somebody else in this position or that. And it might be the case that somebody comes up. So the goalkeeping one's really interesting because I feel like if we sign a goalkeeper like if we sign Seagrass, I'll be delighted because I like them as a player, but it will make me wonder, does Oluwayemi have a future? And if he goes and starts smashing it elsewhere, they would say, we've missed a trick there. Interesting sticker twist philosophy. And also I think just on the transfer strategy, I don't think it's changed that much in terms of how we're scouting players. The reason I say that is if you think about the players we're signing, project players, they were all usually about under 24 from leagues that were only fanciable, for teams we didn't know were quite below, a million or so. That's almost every player Ange signed. You can describe them that way. The difference is, I think, Ange is the one picking them out of that selection. So he's going, right, I need guys that meet all this criteria, but also fit my system, and that's where he's accepted. So he's like, he's not gaming the system, but he's taking the restrictions placed upon him and doing it the right way and working within that. So that's why when the likes of Lowell coming in or any changes you can imagine, this will be quite consistent. He's cleverly working within that system that we put in place. And I just think it's an important thing to point out that, we've slaughtered some of the signs we've had in the past, but I think the idea was good, but the strategy wasn't there. But it seems now like we've got a very clear strategy of these are the type of players we want.
Yeah.
But with that remit of cheap, young, able to fit the system.
Well, I just think it's something we discussed on here a few times previously. And I'm going to throw this one at yourself, James. Colin Watt and I did a show a while back, and we looked at what we regarded as being the best Celtic team from the players who had appeared in the last decade, let's say. And the players that made the final 11s, because there were two different teams, of course, but the players who made the final 11s were all still current. So although it was a team from within the last 10 years, it's not as if you're saying, what's your best Celtic team you've ever seen? And Danny McGregor at right back. It was guys who could still be playing in the same team. And the point at the end of that show was, if Celtic's approach to recruitment was tweaked in any kind of way where you could get a Wanyama and a Van Dijk and a Denayer and Paddy Roberts and Fraser Forster and Dembele and Edouard all in the same team, then you look at your kind of aspirations slightly differently on a European stage, and it could be the only way that you can progress. And I think I've come to realise that you either get extremely lucky with all those players coming together at the same time, or you completely change that strategy of buy in, put them on a platform, sell them within 3 years for a big profit. Because we've all kind of accepted over the piece, James, that is where Celtic are. That's how we've kind of worked the system, and we've worked it really well. And we've had to work it like that because of all the restrictions in Scottish football finance preventing us from making income streams like clubs in England, for example. So the selling of players has always been kind of like a massive part of our income stream. And I've always said, wouldn't it be great to bring someone in, and that person at the moment is obviously Ange, who might want to stick around for 4 or 5 years and build a team, rather than every couple of years or every year selling our top players. We're not selling any top players this summer. I'd be astonished if we did. Is it possible at a club like Celtic, do you think, James, to have someone like Ange for 4 or 5 years and build a team over that period?
Well, you've just got to look at the clubs that we thought were on a similar level to us maybe 5 or 6 years ago. You just look at Ajax. They kept Erik ten Hag for maybe, what was it, 5 or 6 years? They kept them, and that was after they took him to a Champions League semi-final. But I think the way football is, there's a food chain to football these days. It's just extremely difficult for a club of Celtic's stature, our standing in football at the moment, to be able to convince these players to stay when they've got the allure of the Premier League riches or the Galacticos across Europe. It's just hard to keep a hold of these players when there's a pathway to the money and the allure of the Premier League right there waiting for them.
Absolutely. And I think the only way that you can maybe extend their stay is by doing something in the Champions League. So it's like a catch-22 scenario, isn't it? A player's name came to my mind, Brian, when you were talking about Kyogo scoring hat-tricks against Real Madrid. And it would be good to replay that in the future if it comes true, because you have been a bit of a Acsom Nostradamus in the past, let's not forget. 2 players who scored against Real Madrid in the Champions League who we later signed were Timo Pukki and Harold Bratback. So those 2 guys had done that. Not a hat-trick as such. I think, actually, I'm pretty sure Bratback scored a double against Real Madrid. You need to check that. But it was Champions League. Those 2 players scored against Real Madrid. Celtic went out and bought them. And the rest, as they say, is history. But another name that came to my mind, God knows how, because I thought it had kind of like been airbrushed out in my memory. Who remembers Rivaldo Coetzee? Remember we were about to sign him from Ajax Cape Town? Remember that? And then, did he fail a medical? Something happened at the last minute.
It was either a medical or a work permit or something like that. It wasn't even the actual Ajax. It was like a South African academy version of Ajax. It was something strange. Ajax Cape Town or something strange like that.
That's right. And obviously the deal fell down. He's a South African internationalist, like you say. And he plays with Mamelodi Sundowns FC, who are obviously a massive club in South Africa. So there you go. That was just a wee player's name that pops into my mind. But the reason I bring it up, Brian, is we're going to be linked with so many players and it's going to come to nothing. You've already mentioned the fact that you like Big Vinny, as you've called him. What's your thoughts on the likes of Siegrist? Let's start with the goalkeeper then. You have concerns about the fact that he's going to stop the development of someone else. The kind of rumblings this morning, and I don't know what the social media chat is today, I've not had a chance to check, but the rumblings we've been hearing is that it is progressing, that deal with Siegrist. We are going to bring him in. They're talking, obviously, medicals, etc. And I look at that, as we sit here, we've got Joe Hart, Scott Bain or Siegrist as number 2 and 3, Chobe Owoleyemi as your number 4 backup, and we've also got Connor Hazard. So we've still got 5 goalies with a 6th out on loan. So what do you do with the goalkeeper situation? If we're going to run through the squad here, Brian, starting at the goalie, if you bring in Siegrist, what do we do with the rest of them? Do you keep Toby? Do you put him out on a development loan? Do you push Connor Hazard on a permanent elsewhere? And what does the future hold for Scott Bain? So where are we with the goalkeeper scenario now?
So I think Bain's staying. I don't think he's going anywhere. I think Ange seems to like him. He's one of those players I think is probably sort of steady Eddie at the back just in case, but I think he's going to be very much number 3. Siegrist, as I say, my concerns are more around our academy structure, but as a keeper, I think he was a standout last season. I think he's a really, really good keeper. Not sure who is with the ball at his feet, but if we're interested in talks, then Ange's obviously seen enough. And I would trust him as a backup. Again, big unit as well, physical presence, strong shot stopper. So I think Hazard, I don't think he's got a future at Celtic. I've been on record as saying I don't think anyone that's currently out on loan has got a future at Celtic. I think that'll be very much a clear out. With Toby, I would like to see him go on loan if he's not going to feature, because otherwise, like, you play in these low leagues all you want, but he needs to be tested in a real competitive, team with a spotlight on him, a team in the Championship or something. He is quite highly rated, by all accounts. I think he's under 19s England keeper, isn't he, or under 21s? So he is highly rated. So I would like him to go on loan, or if I was picking, I'd have Hart, Siegrist, and Oluwayemi. It's my three. Aiden could go, but I don't see that happening. So I think realistically, Toby goes out on loan and Siegrist comes in.
Right. So I'm looking at Oluwayemi then, James, and I'm thinking a completely different player, of course, but I'm thinking of the stage that Dembele was at this time last year. We didn't know he was going to get injured, but there definitely was a point in that young player's career where he really had to go out there and get games, and he had to go out and get that loan deal. It didn't happen. We heard that loan deals were put in front of him and he refused because it wasn't a high enough level. He ended up playing for the B team at a lower level than the club he had been offered to. But I think we're now in that situation where if we're bringing in Siegrist, and as Brian says, Ange seems to like Bain, your top three's Hearts, Bain, Siegrist, you've got to get Toby out on loan somewhere, haven't you? And if that's the case, Conor Hazard, 24, I think he's been at Helsinki now for about 6 or 7 months playing games, Northern Ireland International. You try and push him on, and whoever the young goalkeeper is coming through plays for the B team. Do you think that would be a wise way of dealing and utilising your goalkeepers?
Just on the loan spell you're talking about, maybe loan them out. I don't know, would a loan be the best for them? Because we've loaned out a lot of players over recent years. Has there been a lot of players where a loan spell out for Celtic has helped push them towards the first team? Because I think Scott Robertson's, Luke O'Connell's, the only sort of won the last sort of 5 or 6 years would be Christopher Aya. Whereas he was obviously a standout or anomaly. But in an ideal world, I've already mentioned the podcast quite a few times, I'm not the biggest Scott Bain fan. I'd rather we got rid of him in an ideal world, but I think he's fairly settled. He's well liked around the training ground, so he's going to stay. But I would be a fan of taking Siegrist in. I think he's a good goalkeeper, solid for the Premiership. I don't know if I'd be confident with him at a European or a Champions League game, but then again, I wouldn't be confident with any of our goalkeepers apart from Joe Hart in a Champions League game. So I think as a backup, it would be fairly solid. I think he had a good clean sheet record for Dundee United as well, compared to the amount of games he played. So for the Scottish League, he'd be very solid for a backup.
It's an interesting point you make there about loanees again, going the other way, James, because I think in fairly recent times, like you say, Chris Ayer, I think Ryan Christie did well up at Aberdeen, and Callum McGregor's the obvious one when he went to Notts County.
I think that was about like 10 years ago now. It was at Notts County, was it? It was here with Grealish.
Yes, aye. And I mean, there's not been many others, but even if you just look at goalies specifically, Ross Doohan, highly rated goalkeeper, he ends up going out on 3, 4, maybe even more loan deals, never comes back. Same thing happened with who was the other player that's left in this pre-season, Brian, other goalkeeper who was playing with the Bees last season. Ryan Mullen. So there's another guy who loaned out, and then he leaves. It looks like Conor Hazard's going the same way. And I think there is maybe a fear that Toby Oluwayemi, if you start loaning him out, it might go down the same route. We don't really want that. Cycle. Yeah. No, you really don't want that to happen. I mean, when was the last time we actually developed a keeper from academy to first team and he played 50 games, let's say, or more? It's been a long time.
The thing to bear in mind, though, is that the issues with the academy are sort of legacy issues, and the academy by its nature can't be fixed in a season or two, because you need to get these guys young and develop them over years and then get them into the team. Ange's only been here a year. So I know in the past loaning these players hasn't worked, but then for Ange coming in and changing things as much as he has in a year, I think he'll have a real hand in the young guys coming in, and then that academy will fit. Has that continuity thing I always talk about. I think that was so. It could be that none of this current crop academy players fit his system or their attitude works the way he wants them to work at all. So they won't come through. And that's no Ange stopping the academy. That's the fact that he's inherited this and it might not be to his standard. So that's something to bear in mind as well, because when we talk about loan players maybe loaning them out hasn't worked, and you've got is it Kieran McInroy just went to Kilmarnock there, things like that, or releasing these players. It's something that's been a kind of historic issue and a long term issue that it's only the only way you can fix that is also long term. So that I think it's a wee bit harder to judge in terms of how it's going to look in a couple of years. I think maybe in 3 years' time we can then see how if Ange has changed that system or if that academy is working again. But I do think it almost needs, with maybe a few exceptions, sort of bumped down and started again under the watchful eye of an Ange. So I think it's a false equivalency comparing what was to what is, because it's so different now, I think.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I mean, going right back to, I remember looking at the amount of players who were freed in the pre-season after Jock Stein took over, and you're talking not just double figures, it was closer to 20 players who had obviously been part of a previous regime. So you're spot on with that. Brian Scott Howe comes in, he wants to start a wee song, Jota happening soon, I feel it in my fingers, I feel it in my toes. That's not the kind of song we'll be singing on Acsom, is it? Wet, the Wets.
All around me.
I don't think they're of a Celtic State of Mind.
No.
Clyde Bank fans, aren't they? Aye. So if we're looking then to move into the defensive area, right back, I'm looking at that now, and as much as I love Tony Ralston and his development, his resurgence, resurrection, all of the above has been the story of the season for me. One of the stories of the season last season. He's a second choice behind Juranovic. And then I look at the fact that we've got Stephen Welsh who can play right back as a backup, like a third choice. You're grimacing a wee bit there, Brian. Are you happy with that, or do you think we're going to strengthen in that area? Because I don't think it's an obvious area that we would need to strengthen in.
I don't know if we need to strengthen that. I think that's somewhere where we could look at, is there anyone coming through or getting someone younger in is to build up. But no Welsh at right back for me. I like Welsh. I like him a lot, actually. I think he's a bit underrated, but I just get Gary Caldwell vibes when you talk about Welsh at right back. Like Caldwell, another player I liked, actually, but when he was absolutely mother at right back, so I can't have that one. But it'd be interesting to see how Montgomery fits. Have any future as a, because if you imagine, we're almost definitely going to get a left back in, hopefully of Juranovic type quality, with Taylor behind him. And then is Montgomery a third option there? Because he has played a decent amount of games under Ange, although he did go on loan.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to see how that one works if we get a similar type player at right back. But I don't know he'll be desperate to buy anybody in. I think as well, we've seen in the past that he only done it once or twice, but he's changed to a back three on occasions as well. So there's always that option. But no, I would hate to see. I know he's done it, but Welsh for me at right back. Because remember, maybe in a different team, but he'd be an inverted fullback, so you then really pushed him into centre mid.
Yeah.
I don't know about the big man's passing ability. But he's good at centre half, but I don't know about centre mid or right back.
No, it's a good point when you consider how we utilise the fullbacks, Brian. When you look at the squad and you realise that Stephen Welsh is your third choice right back, James, do you grimace in the same way that Brian Degnan did, or is it one of the things we can run with it? We can actually run with what we've got in terms of the right back, because it's no position that I think needs strengthened. It's certainly not one on my list that I think we need to bring in another right back. Are you happy where we are with the right backs?
Yeah, I'm fairly comfortable with Juranovic and Ralston as the options at right back. If you look at the Celtic 11 and the depth, the right back doesn't really scream out. I think that's probably one of our most secure positions, because Ralston is perfectly good backup for Scottish footballers. We've seen he's been brilliant this season and capped at Scotland now and got his first international goal. Then you've got Juranovic, who was an absolute steal for us. He's Croatian international right back, and we saw him, he just absolutely held it down against Kylian Mbappe, one of the best players on the planet, in his own backyard. So there's not very often that a Celtic player puts in a performance like that on the international stage. So I think we're fairly comfortable at right back.
I love Juranovic's confidence. It's not cocky. He's a bit of a character, and as a result of that and his great performances, the Celtic fans have really taken to him. The left back position, I agree with you, Brian, is of more of a priority, and I think we're in a position now where our two full-backs in Ralston and Taylor have stepped up several levels. I think both players last season under Ange Postecoglou, they both can fit into this inverted full-back role pretty comfortably, I think. Taylor has come in fact, both players in their Celtic careers have come in for a lot of stick individually, and it seems as though they've come through that. I'm not sure if that's the case with Taylor as such, but I don't think that they're viewed as being weak links as maybe previously they were. But even in saying that, I still reckon that we're going to strengthen. When you look at some of the players that have been linked, there are quite a few left backs being linked to Celtic at the moment. And indeed, I think the first player that was linked this pre-season was Gihazi, the Iraqi left back from Hammarby, and there's been a few others added onto that. Adam Montgomery, I think that's an interesting one because he was being utilised not just domestically but in Europe, and then all of a sudden he's getting loaned out. Scales, we've got to mention Scales. He was brought in. He's played all of his games, I think, in the left back area. He might have came on as a sub at left wing back, I think, maybe just ahead of the left back. But I don't think that he's going to be in the plans because he wasn't even making the matchday squads near the end of last season. So you've got Taylor, and then there's a void there. Left back, for me, Brian, it's been a position, people go on about the fact that we've never properly replaced Kieran Tierney. And I think I get that. I completely get it because we tried to bring in Bolingoli, which has been a bit of a disaster for many reasons, not all football related. And then we bring in Greg Taylor, and you think, yeah, Greg Taylor, again, domestically, is a very solid option, but we still need to bring in that quality, the Juranovic-style quality on the left-hand side. Is it a priority for you, Brian?
100%, yeah. I think I actually think Greg Taylor's a wee bit underrated, but I still don't think he's brilliant, if that makes sense. He's like him and Ralston are good players that can play great, but we need great players in. And I think Juranovic should potentially be a great player. I think he's got something special about him. The other thing as well is, and I'm not going to go back to the goalkeeper situation, but I don't want players to come in and just be backup. There's got to be players that can come in and potentially replace. So if we're staying a centre half, I don't want to stay in a centre half as backup to Starfield. I want a centre half that's going to compete or take his place. I want a centre mid that's going to compete, take the place of one of the centre mids, because that's the type of sort of competition you need, especially as you head into the Champions League. I think Greg Taylor's shown attitude-wise, if he has to step up and work hard, he's got the ability to do it. I think him and Ralston share very similar qualities. Their attitude's absolutely spot on, always has been, and they seem like good guys, really strong trainers. But you want is you kind of want to be in a position where maybe Callum McGregor aside because he's captain, no one's position's safe. You want as many players that can just throw in, so your second 11's as strong as your first. Now I get that's going to be hard to get in one transfer window, but that's where I'd like us to get to. So if we are signing players, I want it to be players that could potentially replace the players who are in their position currently. But left back's an easy one. That's an absolute must, I think.
I didn't mention when we were talking about right backs, Brian, sorry, Osaze Urhoghide, because obviously the one game he has played for Celtic has been right back. But, you know, again, it was for me, Urhoghide and Shaw were legacy signings inherited by Ange Postecoglou, who I think, if given a chance, will shell them out and move them on. The left back scenario then, James, if we start the new season having not brought in a left back, would you be pretty disappointed?
Yeah, I would be pretty disappointed. I think for European football, if Celtic are really serious about competing, they'll recognise that a better option at left back is needed. For me, Taylor is about the same quality as Tony Ralston, maybe just a little bit better. What I would like us to get is a Juranovic on the left-hand side. I know that's very hard to find because Josip Juranovic was an absolute steal given the full-back market. But if we can get someone his quality on that sort of flank, then it would be very good. Because in a lot of the big games, specifically the Rangers games and the European games, I think teams, when they were planning to play against Celtic, they would target that left-hand side.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's because of Taylor's height, or maybe they just see him as a weak link. But if teams are looking at Celtic and every single time they play against us, they always go for the same weak link, I think that surely says all about where we need to improve.
Mm-hmm. No, you're spot on. I did notice that, particularly on the European stage as well. I'm keen to bring in a few more comments. Egyptian King, welcome to the show. You're watching on YouTube. Siegrist is defo a no-brainer for me to sign. And again, we might be in a position, in actual fact, where Joe Hart can be rested. That's not something we had the luxury of doing last season. But I remember he almost pulled up against Dundee United. And everybody's thinking to themselves, right, this is the worst case scenario. It shows you the lack of confidence we had in Bain at that time. We just wanted Joe Hart to go through his paces and continue, and thankfully he did. There was a couple of occasions where he didn't play last season. Didn't Barkas play against St Johnstone on Boxing Day? Aye, he did.
That famous performance.
Yep, that famous, exactly. We are going to do a special on Barkas talking about all his tremendous performances, because we got flack for saying he was rotten before.
You always have that.
The Urban Culture. Bain replaced Beaton as social convener. Yes, he did. I mean, Tommy Johnson was the social convener in Martin O'Neill's team, but it gets to the point of he's maybe popular, but you need something a wee bit more than that, I think. Brown Warrior, welcome back. Scott Robertson has been retained and looks to be on the same pathway as Callum McGregor. He's played a lot of football, has Robertson. Now, Brian, you've said a few times, everybody out on loan, they're not going to have a future at Celtic. Would you make an exception in Robertson's case? 20 years of age, over 70 games, senior level with 3 other clubs on loan?
I would like to. It'd just be interesting to see if he, I know was it Doncaster, was it?
He's been at Doncaster, Barnsley and Crewe, I think. I'm going to double check that, but he's had 3 spells out on loan.
I mean, it's good that he's got experience for his age. It's good that he's got experience for his age. It's just, the only reason I'm a wee bit cynical about it is, actually, to be fair, I thought he was older. I thought he was 22 or 23. So, he's only 20, maybe bodes better for him. It all depends. Is he better than what we've got? Is he better than O'Reilly, Turnbull, Hatate or McGregor? No. Is he better than Nediguchi? We don't know. And this is my point. I just don't see these guys coming in and overtaking anybody. And I don't know if we need squad players at the moment. So that's why I'm kind of more cynical about it. But listen, if the guy comes in and follows the McGregor path, then brilliant. I really want, I seem as if I'm negative about the academy, right? And I'm a wee bit, but it's not because I don't want to be. I want it to be great. I want, I would love if we get to a point where we've got 11 guys that are all academy players, competing in the Champions League. That'd be a dream come true. I just think we're very far away from it at this stage. So that's my hesitancy. But Robertson, it'd be good to see how he does, but he's no better than what we've got. And I don't know enough to be super excited about it, if I'm honest.
Well, as you were saying there, James, it wasn't Barnsley, it was actually Gillingham. He went to Gillingham, Doncaster and Crewe. He's played just under 60 games. 20 years of age. He is contracted up until, in fact, he's just entered the last year of his deal, which is an interesting one. Where are we with Scott Robertson if we're looking at the players coming back from their loan spells, James? Do you think it would benefit him? Because you get an impression if he goes out on loan again, you're basically just winding down your contract. So Brian makes the point, is he going to get game time at Celtic this season? And the answer probably is no.
Yeah, I don't really see him getting game time. I've not seen much of rant and raving about him for the sort of past year in his loan spells. I remember, I don't know if it was last season or the season before, where everyone was bigging him up. I think it might have been the Gillingham loan spell. Was that the first one he went on? Mm-hmm. There was a lot of talk about him there. But over the last year, you've not really heard a peep about Scott Robertson out on loan. I think the fact that his contract is up at the end of the season, I think he's just either going to go on a loan move and fizzle out, or sort of B team, then we won't renew him, which is sad because I know Neil Lennon was a big admirer of Scott Robertson. I remember it was a dead rubber game against Cluj in the group stage. Scott Robertson got a run at which to trust a young player who I don't think he'd made an appearance for Celtic at the time for a game like that. It shows he was very highly rated, but it's sort of just fallen by the wayside as the regimes have changed.
Yeah, I think he was 18 when he made that appearance, and it was his debut. And he played pretty well that night, if I remember right. I always refer to that game in relation to people's revisionism when it comes to Craig Gordon. because I remember watching Gordon got a rare start that night, and he was rotten as well. He was murder, and at that point, every Celtic fan in the stadium would have been of the understanding that Gordon's Celtic career was over. But he leaves and plays a few good seasons elsewhere, and all of a sudden we should never have let him go.
He'll make 2 or 3 good saves, but then he'll cost you a goal in the same game. So that says everything you need to know about Craig Gordon.
Yeah, absolutely. Centre halves then. Carter Vickers signed permanently. He was unveiled, much to everybody's delight. I've said a few times already, Brian, he was the one I was more concerned about. I'm not saying Jota's a done deal yet, but Carter Vickers, I was thinking, he was the priority of the two. If you really, and it was like choosing between your 2 kids or your 2 pets, but yeah, I would have gone for Carter Vickers. But B, he was the one I was least confident in actually getting on a permanent. Tremendous bit of business by Celtic, I think. But what else do we need to do in the central defensive areas, Brian?
I think we need a really strong partner for him. I like, Starfelt with a good season, but I think just for that level above, you need someone to come in who is. I mean, Carter Vickers, if he'd been injured, it'd have been a very different defensive performance this season. It just simply would have. He's head and shoulders above anything else we've got at centre half, and anything else we've had for a wee while. So we need someone of that quality partner beside him. If you get that in, and then you've got Starfelt, Welsh there, and then maybe Ian Murray or the boy Boston Law coming up for the B team, I think that's fairly decent. But you don't need someone to cover, but you need a real strong starter. The other thing is as well, and we're making the assumption that Julien's going, based on some of his comments and the fact he's not featured, but you would need someone who is as dangerous in the box as him, because defensively, but more so attacking, he was such a threat at set pieces, Julian, because his height, his presence. We would need that, because as much as we love Carter Vickers, and he had scored a couple of very famous goals now, but he's not the tallest guy. He doesn't win loads of headers in the opposition box, although he's defensively sound. So it'd be interesting. I'd like someone really good with the ball at feet, tall presence. I think that's a must.
See, the thing, this is a wish list, right? It'd be great to tick every single box that we're sitting here talking about. But when we're looking at the central defensive situation as it stands, James, we've got the 2 first picks, Carter Vickers and Starfelt. As Brian says, they forged a very good partnership last season. However, I do agree that had Carter Vickers dropped out at any point, then I'm starting to get worried, because his replacement would have inevitably been either Near Beaton or Stephen Welsh, because Julien was so far out the picture. He gets 20 minutes against Wraith Rovers. That's his entire campaign last season. So you're now looking at that situation, you think, well, who's the backups between what we've got at the club? And Julien will get a mention, Stephen Welsh will get a mention. Liam Scales has never played centre-half for Celtic, so I don't even think he gets a mention. So although we're really delighted that Carter Vickers has come in, we do need another centre-half, don't we? And then if you think to yourself, if you're going to bring another centre-half in, are you bringing in someone as backup, or are you bringing in our first pick? The player I like the look of is Koe Tekura, the Man City player. He's been linked, but the fee that apparently they'll be looking for is in excess of $5 million.
Yeah, Gladbach are after him as well.
So it's going to be a tough... Exactly. I mean, do you go to that degree, James, where you're in a battle and you might end up paying another £5 or £6 million, and then you think, well, he's not a backup now. He's going to be a first choice as well. Or are you buying a backup, maybe more of a younger player, something we've been maybe talking about getting away from recently?
Yeah, I think I would be looking at a backup. I don't think a starting centre-back is a priority for Celtic. I think there's lots of other positions that need attention before a centre-back. I would say the left-back needs more attention. The defensive midfield needs more attention. Maybe even a right winger, if you had added on with Jota. But I think, well, we were talking about a presence. I think Dean Murray, is he not very tall? He wouldn't really have the confidence or presence. He's just a young player, but I'm certain he's very, very tall. So you could maybe, I'd like to see him get a run out in the friendlies, see what sort of impact he can have. But I'd be looking at sort of backup, because Carter Vickers and Starfelt are very separated. Do you want to split them up and end that sort of partnership? Do you want to keep them together as long as you can? Because if it's not broke, you don't want to fix it. That's the best way to put it.
Yeah, 1.93 metres. I don't know what that is in feet and inches. If anybody is a mathematical genius, then please let us know. That is the height of Dane Murray. And it's a good point, though, because you've got Dane Murray with first-team experience, although forced at the time, probably no ideal. I thought he'd done okay. You've got Lawal, as you've mentioned, Brian, who seems to have really stood out last season, as did a few other players in the B team. So you're asking that question, if you're bringing in a centre-half, is it a first pick? If it is, you're going to be doing a battle with the likes of Mönchengladbach for a player like Itakura. He's a quality player. You're going to be spending a lot of money. If we move into the midfield, then it is defensive midfield players that we're being linked with largely. But going back to a point that James made there, Brian, how are you feeling about the two wing areas? Because, yeah, I'm looking at my chickens, but let's say Jota comes in. You've got Jota and Maeda on the left, your third choice being Mikey Johnson. On the right-hand side, you've got Forrest and Abada. Abada being the first choice, of course. And, of course, you've got Jota who can switch between right and left. Is that a position, right or left, that you think Celtic are looking to strengthen as well?
I would imagine so. I think you saw that they've switched wings, but what you saw is they've either played Jota and Abada or Maeda and Jota. Mm-hmm. Because if you look at the way Abada and Maeda are, they're very much sort of, they're not traditional wingers. You know, they don't jink about it. Their crosses are decent, but really their strength is coming in at the back post as a second striker. That's why they're scoring a lot of goals. Maeda, obviously, his strength is pressing for the front. So he's real key to how we play. But I think the dynamic works when you've got one of them and then a winger like Jota, who's a bit more traditional, a bit jinkier. Now, James Forrest, I don't think can do that anymore. I don't think that's his game. I think he's still good to have in the squad, but I don't think his game. So I would imagine we'd be looking at someone like a more traditional winger coming in. I think that would be a valuable thing. And again, I want it to be someone that can compete for a first place. I never get the idea of signing guys that are squad players. I just always think, what's the point? You know, if you're coming out to be a squad player and cover for somebody, the other competition's not there because they know that's what you're there for. So I'd like someone that can come in and compete, that can rotate. Because the other thing is, as well, it's all right saying, you know, I think, say Jota can play most games, but if he gets injured first game of the season, you're suddenly left with Forrest, Maeda, Abada. And against Champions League teams, you need a bit of flair and a bit different. So
you do.
It's all right. And again, James said the partnership with Starfelt and Carter Vickers, which was excellent. But again, if we spoke about Carter Vickers gets injured, pulls ligaments in the first day of the season, you're going to be happy in the Champions League with Welsh and Starfelt.
I'm touching everything in the studio that's wooden at the moment, Brian, because obviously Carter Vickers and Jota getting injured would be disastrous for Celtic.
But we need to, it wouldn't be as disastrous if we've got someone of equal quality that can come and replace them or partner them, is my point. And I think we need to be clever and ambitious with our signings, because this idea of just stocking up the squad, I don't think benefits anybody. And I think you can see that with the types of signings like Liam Shaw, Urhoghide, McCarthy, people limping with that. So I think it's an important distinction to make.
Yeah, definitely. I remember just before the Midtjylland games last season, if you look back on the kind of week leading up to that, there was a point made, and it was, what if something happens to Beaton? And of course it did. It did happen to Beaton, and it was a disaster. But it is interesting when you start to strip it back, like you say there. I mean, what is your backup if we get an injury or someone doesn't sign? And you know, your backup's Mikey Johnson on the left. You know, Owen Moffat got some games on the right-hand side last season. Are these players really going to step it up to the levels that Celtic want to be performing? James, again, you know, maybe not obviously, but do you think it is a position that we're still looking at to bring someone in? I mean, the best case scenario would be you bring someone in like Jota who can play both wings, or Maeda who can play both wings. Is that something that you think is on the shopping list?
I think, much like centre-back, it's not a priority, but it would be naive just to ignore the position altogether. I think it's clear to everybody James Forrest's best days are behind him. His legs, he's kind of losing his legs a bit, but he's still a good finisher. He can still pop up with important moments. We saw that last season. But it would be smart to look at other options at right wing. I'm not too sure how good we are there for the Celtic B team. What position is Rocco Vata? Is that a striker he is?
He can. Second striker. He's
He can play a 10, but again, with Vata, he's another one we've not actually mentioned today. I think he is in that mould. Brian's mentioned Lawal, and I think Vata's probably in that category as well. When did these players start getting introduced to the first team and get some game time? Because you'd think that if last season the players that we used forced the likes of Moffat and Dane Murray, etc., you would think this season it would be the time for the likes of Vata to make an appearance. Do you think? I mean, he's only 17 at this stage.
Yeah, he's very young.
So he is still... But again, I just don't want to be in a situation where we're talking about him in the same vein as Ben Doak. You want him to see a pathway at Celtic, don't you? Because, I mean, again, it's difficult to say because we've seen Dembele leaving after he was one of Europeans' golden kids. Vata looks to be the real deal, and you want to make sure that he's the real deal in the green and white hoops, don't you? I think we've already spoken about the defensive midfield scenario and the fact that Celtic have been linked with quite a few. What's your thoughts, O'Brien, on the striker situation? Because we've now got a scenario with not that long ago, Boxing Day, we've had to play Joey Dawson. We're now in a position where we've got Kyogo, Giakoumakis. Who else? Do you still think we need another striker?
It depends. I think this depends what happens with the wings, because obviously Abada can come in and play there, Maeda can come in and play there. So I think he would probably sign another winger before he signs another striker, because you can rotate that in quite nicely. And then you've also got to sign Johnny Kenny, who actually I think he's not the most prolific, but physically he looks the part. He's very, very fast. You know, quite good with the press, so he could always maybe come in. So I don't think he'll sign a striker, just based on the fact that Maeda and Abada can both play as a striker if you had to. I still think, though, that's why you need another high-quality winger. And guys like Vata, I'd like to see him come and maybe play, you know, a few cup games or maybe play domestically, but if you're asking me if I think he can start a Champions League game, no. And I think that's the level we need to be aiming for now.
Absolutely. What's your thoughts, James? I think you were agreeing with Brian there regarding the striker scenario. Does it come down to the recruitment on the wings and the fact that we do have guys like Maeda and Abada who can cover it centre forward if necessary?
I think we're fairly sorted for striker. That's, I would say, if you look across the board, that's the position we least need to worry about. You've got Kyogo and Giakoumakis, then you've got Maeda, who he can play left wing and striker both naturally. Then even Abada could fill in a role there, not as naturally as the other three, but he can still do a job there, as we've seen over the course of the season. I think it would be good to have maybe some of the youth players as an emergency backup, but that's just if disaster struck where both Kyogo, Giakoumakis, and then even Maeda and Abada were injured, which is very unlikely.
Yeah, Rocco Vata indeed can play attacking midfield, second striker, and also on the right-hand side. So let's hope that he is introduced into Ange's plans. It's an interesting time to be a Celtic supporter. We're in far better spirits than we were this time last year. We're looking forward to any further announcements by the club in relation to incomings, and hopefully one of those will be the one and only Jota. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you everybody for getting involved in the comment section. If you are watching on YouTube, make sure to subscribe to the channel. There are lots of interesting videos coming up on YouTube, and it's all free of charge. We upload videos on a daily basis. All that's left for me to say thank you, Brian Degnan and James McKenzie, for joining me once again on a Celtic State of